Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to the Wednesday, August 21st meeting of the Board of Trustees for the Utah Transit Authority, and welcome you this beautiful summer morning. Would you please stand, and we'd invite you to join us in repeating the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let us start with our safety first minute, and then we'll go to our oath. Let's go with our safety first minute, and then we'll go to the oath of office. Sheldon?
Good morning, Chair, Trustees. Appreciate the opportunity. I'm Sheldon Shaw, Acting Safety and Security Manager. And for the safety message today, one I've used before, but it's appropriate. It is hot out there. It's hot again today. It's going to be close to 100 degrees, no clouds out there. The National Safety Council statistics say that in 2017, there were 87 fatalities across the United States that were contributed to heat-related incidents. And so who's at risk? Infants left in cars, elderly, folks with chronic health conditions, but we have a lot of our fellow employees who have work that keep them outside for most of their shifts, and we need to pay attention to that and make sure they get a chance to have breaks, get into air conditioning. Between 11 and 3 is the worst time of day to be out there, so what can we do about that? And then finally, we all need to stay hydrated to make sure that we're taking the fluids we need to. Appreciate the opportunity.
Great, thank you. A great reminder. Our next item up is the oath of office to be given to our new Executive Director, Carolyn Gannott, and our own Kathy Griffiths will administer that for us.
I, Carolyn Gannott, do solemnly swear that I will support, obey, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this state, and that I will discharge the duties of my office as Executive Director for the Utah Transit Authority with fidelity. Thank you.
We'll be pleased to hear from Carolyn in just a minute when we get to our agency report. We'll next go to item 5, which is public comment. Bob, do we have any public comment?
Yes, we do have Mr. Michael Sheffield here today.
Mr. Sheffield, if you'd stand forward, if you wouldn't mind rotating that mic 180 degrees, that'll work better for us.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Just came here to comment on something that was discussed last board meeting. And it was the issue of coverage versus ridership. And I think the survey that UTA had showed a 60-40 being in favor of ridership, and just wanted to echo that and say I think that's important. I'm a graduate student studying transportation engineering, and just try to involve myself in the conversation and what's going on. The conversation that ensued seemed to favor that as well, and increasingly so, we're becoming a more and more transit-oriented society. All across the country, we're seeing that trend of what's being called rediscovering transit, if you will. And just in February, after decades of controversy, ITE now recommends that cities remove minimum parking requirements, which is what makes transit so difficult, is the sprawl and being so spread out. So I think focusing on ridership is good to move forward and should be an unequivocal yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Very valuable input. Any other, Bob?
None of the internet.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Our next item up is approval of our minutes from our August 7th, 2019 meeting.
Mr. Chair, I move approval of the minutes of the August 7th meeting.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. We're next to our agency report with our new executive director, Carolyn. Good morning, and please, if you wouldn't mind sharing any thoughts you might have, and then I know there's also an item later on in regards to some buses that either you or Eddie might opine on. So.
Okay, thank you. Actually, just been here 2 days, and actually, this is my third day. It's been actually a really good experience so far. Just to let you know, I think some of you do know that I was out first day, 4 a.m. at the Meadowbrook facility and met the operators and then went over to the maintenance area. So that was really a great experience to just meet some of the our day-to-day line workers that are out there and out on the streets and serving our customers. And then yesterday I went out to North Temple Station in the afternoon and did a sort of a customer handshake and met some of the passengers that were boarding the front runner and waiting for the front runner in the very hot weather out there. But it was good to meet some of them. Some of them, obviously are just giving us comments or feedback or things they want to say. Also some, words of appreciation for the services. That was really wonderful. Got to meet with the executive team. I'm just very happy to be here as part of the Utah Transit Authority family. It does feel like a family here, how people work together. Met with my executive team yesterday as we get prepared for the budget presentations in about a month from now, and I just am here to deliver the mission for the board and continue to work with you on the vision for the agency going forward. So I'm very, very excited to be here. Thank you.
Great. And we're excited to have you here. Thank you. Let's see. I think there is
There's
an item on the Gillig bus purchase. And
Yes.
Good morning.
morning.
Just wanted to provide an update on the 2019 bus buy contract that we have with Gillig.
Oh, please go
Yep.
ahead, Eddie.
On
Sorry.
April 18, 2018, the previous board approved the purchase of up to 45 diesel or CNG buses. That number was recently adjusted for 2019 and options were moved to future years. As you know, we only purchased 10 buses in 2019 and those were for the Salt Lake City service expansion. The reason for the change was due to extending the life expectancy of our bus fleet. In the second half of 2018, UTA reevaluated the bus fleet and made the decision to extend the life of most of our 40-foot buses from 12 to 14 years. The idea came about during the 2019 budgeting process. I met with all of the maintenance managers and together we evaluated the fleet type. Each fleet type, we looked at reliability, maintenance cost, and just overall condition of the fleet. Based on the analysis, we were able to adjust the required number of buses for 2019. Ultimately, this initiative provided about a $10 million benefit to the agency and enabled us to fund other state of good repair needs.
And so, does the contract end with this year, or how does that work? I mean, do
No,
you
those-
have the option of purchasing still more buses in 2020?
Yes, those options are just moved to future years.
Okay. Good. Any questions that anybody has? It's not very often that the contract gets reduced or the request gets reduced, so
Right.
just wanted some background to it.
Great.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carolyn, anything else on the agency report?
I think that's it for today.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next up is item 8, which is our financial report, and Bob Biles.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We'll go over the dashboard quickly, and then I'm going to expand a little bit and talk about some historical sales tax numbers. This actually shows that sales tax is over budget. I think we may have missed how we budgeted at that because we've been under budget since the beginning of the year. So I think that's just a budgeting anomaly. Because if you go down and look at sales tax in the chart below, you see that our collections year over year and 6 month over 6 month are still declining. The red line, that's the 6 month one, that's at a 2.77% clip. The last 6 months compared to the 6 months last year, same period. And then year to year, we're down to about 3.2%. Now, as I've looked at the historical, remember we talked about there's this 4-month period where we were seeing 13% growth. Well, last year from now until the end of the year, we saw about 3.2% growth. So we may be able to make some headway this year, but we'll see. As far as the fair revenues, we're very close to the amount that we budgeted for the year. Operating expense were $6.7 million under budget for the year, and we'll get into some of the details later on that. Fuel price continues to hold for us. For the year, $3.03. We budgeted $2.50. Remember, every dime is about $600,000 savings in the course of the year. And then ridership, we're a little bit ahead of last year, actually.
The question on ridership.
Sure.
When I was looking through this, this morning, I was delighted to see that ridership, but is that mostly coming from UVX or?
I didn't look at the ridership report this last month, but certainly UVX has helped greatly.
Okay.
Light rail has been down, and then UVX has been up and helping offset that, and Frontrunner's been up.
Okay.
So looking at the sales tax collections, this shows it by county and overall, and you may not remember last month's numbers, but if you look at the 3.2% out there to the right, last month was 5%. So again, when we looked at last year and the large variability in those months, that's showing up now as we're looking at sales tax collections. So I thought it might be worthwhile to go take a look, do a little deeper dive at sales tax. And the Tax Commission keeps track of taxable sales by what they call supersectors. And so there's taxable retail, there's taxable services, taxable business investment, and then all other sales. So just so you know, the taxable business investment will include the manufacturing exemption, and all other sales will include internet sales. So you can see these are a comparison of how the state of Utah is divided up by percentages and how we're divided up by percentages. So 50% of our sales tax comes from taxable retail, 25% from taxable services, business investment about 15%, and all other sales 7.1%. So as we look at the growth rates, this becomes important to remember which one provides the highest amount of revenue to us. And so if you look at the quarterly taxable sales year over year, this is comparing 12 months to 12 months at the end of these periods. You can see at the end of the first quarter 2018, we had 6.5% growth. At the second quarter, we had 7.5, and it's been going down ever since then. At the end of the first quarter of this last year, we're at 3.9%. Well, let's take a look at it by supersectors and see what's going on. So retail trade, which makes up 51% of our revenues, for the first two bars there, we were up above 5%. Since then, we've been 3.7, 3.5, 2.6. So part of that is shift to internet sales, right? At least some of it. Then on the services, it's kind of the same thing. We had a good quarter at the end of the first quarter of second quarter of 2018, but it's been 3.4, 3.7, 2.2. in the last 9 months of what we're reporting here.
What kind of things qualify for services? Is that like automotive repair?
I assume anything like that where people are providing service. I didn't get into the details of what makes up each of these, but yeah, you think of services and the services that you pay taxes on. It's interesting that the business investment and how that has dropped significantly in the last 15 months of this reporting. It was at 14.6, down to 9.3, down to 7.5, down to 4.5, and then in the first quarter of 2019, 12 months to 12 months, it's actually minus 2.7%. Now, the good news is, all other has been showing tremendous growth from, I didn't get into the breakout of this, but mainly internet sales you would expect to be there. So taking a look at it from and I should have said one other thing there. The manufacturing exemption took effect first quarter of this year. So we're seeing the effects of 3 months of that, but I can't get in, and I asked, can we see how much that is? And they said, well, the tax commission doesn't keep track of that. We'd have to find someone else in the state government who does try to keep track of those exemptions. So looking at it for the 12-month period ending March 31st, these are the taxable sales amounts for each of the periods 2018 versus 2019. So we were up on retail, up in services, but again, retail was up 4%, services 3.7%, the taxable business investment 4.8%, all other sales 27%, much smaller number, but still it was up fairly significantly. And then if you just look at the first quarter to the first quarter, you get a different picture. That the taxable retail was up 2.6%, taxable services 2.2%, business investment actually down 2.7%, and then all other sales up by 36%. So we'll keep tracking and looking at the sales tax historical. It takes about 3 months after the end of a quarter for the tax commission to make this available. So we're always, looking a little bit behind on this. And we do have data where we can go look at specific groups within there. But since we're not the taxing entity, we don't get to look at the actual detail itself.
Bob, I had a quick question. So if I'm just understanding this correctly, what you're saying is that the manufacturing exemptions of some kind are kind of the negative impact for the taxable business investments. Is that how we're understanding that?
Well, I'm assuming that's part of it. I actually pulled the fiscal note for let me get it. I actually pulled the fiscal note, and the projection was that local taxes would go down by 27 million this fiscal year through June 30th, and that would be offset by increased internet sales. Now, remember 30% of any local tax in the fiscal notes. So if it's 27 million, 30% of that, it's about 8 million, almost 9 million for us that would be at risk. And the question is, does the internet sales compensate for that? And the fiscal notes, the estimate was, yes, that would happen. But we'll see how it actually turns out. And so that was just for 6 months. If you look at for the next fiscal year, the first full fiscal year, it's $85 million reduction. And again, we're about 30% of that. So it's substantial.
Bob, recently the legislature's held a number of open houses on tax issues. And among the conversation in some of those was the fact that internet sales, there's been a court ruling evidently that allows internet sales to be taxed.
Correct. That's the Wayfair decision.
By the states.
Mm-hmm.
Has that gone into effect now, or when will that be effective?
Yes, that did go into effect, and the manufacturing exemption was triggered by that decision.
By that one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So we are able to receive sales tax on internet sales in the state of Utah now.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the legislation was changed a year or so ago. In preparation for that, there was a provision that said any gain from that would go into a holding account for the state to decide what to do. Well, that was taken out with I think the manufacturing exemption. So I thought I'd give you a little more information on sales tax growth, since that's a big concern for us since that makes up, almost 70% of our revenue, operating revenue. I go back and look at expense. Again, we're 6.7 million under budget. A lot of that's in administration. It's been the IT directors about 1.6 million under budget, legal 630, executive director are already $441,000 under budget. So, and risk management's 818,000, and we have a presentation later today to talk about some risk management and insurance and some of those charges that'll be coming on here later this year. Operations support, the main thing there is asset management. We're 470,000 under there, and the CPO office is $141,000 under budget. Paratransit, it's pretty much divided among mobility management, administration, maintenance. They're all $200,000 to $250,000 under budget. Maintenance away, it's mainly wages and benefits and some propulsion power. Light rail, we're over budget. The primary things are wages and benefits and sick leave vacation. We implemented our accrual for sick leave, and so that added some expense this month. You might remember last month they were right on budget, and so we had this accrual that knocked them down just a little bit. Commuter rail, that includes $579,000 of diesel savings. And on the bus side, it's mainly the maintenance groups, and that's where the fuel savings are at. So Salt Lake maintenance is $414,000 under budget. Timpanogos, $448,000, and Ogden about $452,000. Then looking at it from the expense line viewpoint, again, the wages and benefits were over budget mainly because of that accrual. And one of the things we're talking about now is what do we need to do differently as we budget for next year to make sure we accurately project what that accrual will be. So that particular accrual is once an employee reaches the age 55, has been here 5 years, they earn sick leave benefits if they retire. That gets converted into an account. And so that's the point that we have to accrue for it. Services, planning has $442,000 surplus, IT 1.1, and legal again about $530,000. Fuel, it's $2.2 million. Diesel's $1.6 million of that, and gasoline's about $250,000. Parts, we're over budget on parts. The actual parts are $1.1 million over budget, but that's offset by the warranties of about $450,000. Utilities, telephone, were $400,000 to the good, and then all other includes things like purchase transportation, where we're $616,000 under budget, contingency $600,000 under, and insurance $950,000.
Ask a question on the parts warranty piece. Eddie was just mentioning how they had decided to extend buses a couple of years. Does that play into, we obviously aren't spending as much on the actual purchase.
Yes, let me ask Eddie to come up and talk about that.
Or are we just had a rash of good luck with repairs and had a lot of
Yeah, there is a couple of answers there. Obviously, when you extend the life of a vehicle, you're going to see some additional parts expense. That's going to happen. I don't think that that's necessarily what's playing into this.
Okay.
In the 2019 budget, every year you're always, trying to meet your target number, right? And last year we had a parts reserve and a fuel reserve. So obviously, if you're going to accept some risk in your budget, that was one of the items that we looked at. But really what's driving this is just big parts going out. So I think I reported to the board, I think it was a couple of meetings ago, if a turbo goes out on Front Runner on one of the locomotives, that's $44,000. That hits your budget just like that. And so it's big ticket items. If you have there's a computer on the hybrid vehicles called a DPIM. It's about $65,000 to $70,000 when that goes out. transmission for a hybrid's in the neighborhood of about $10,000. So these are things that don't go out each and every day. A lot of times when we're doing the budgets, we're thinking about normal wear and tear parts. And sometimes if you hit with a rash of things like that, and, you know, I've been in the fleet business a long time, and a lot of times when one goes, they all go. And so you start to see a rash of things. And that's what's happening right now. Front runners having issues with some turbos. I think that's going to be remedied by, you know, the new engine overhauls. Obviously, those come back with new turbos on them. And then on the bus side, our 2010 hybrids are starting to have some transmission issues. So a lot of that's what's driving some of our parts cost.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Great. Thank you, Bob, for that report. Next item up is a resolution authorizing the execution of a certification of intent to participate in the Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Trust Funding Assistance Program for replacement of diesel buses. Mary, welcome and good morning.
Good morning. As most of you, I believe, have heard, we were notified last week by DAQ that we were selected to receive a portion of our request for the Volkswagen settlement. And we've received funding for up to 20 vehicles in the amount of $13,079,240. That would cover 65% of the cost of the buses and the related infrastructure. And they have asked that if we intend to go forward with this project, that we sign a certification of intent to proceed. So this is to allow the executive director to sign that notice of intent.
We obviously will most likely replace our oldest buses, or at least the most working. I guess the question is, I don't know if you have this answer, if Eddie wants to come. How are you choosing which buses you're replacing?
So we had to identify specifically in the grant application which buses we would be using, and it had to meet certain criteria, ones that we weren't intending to replace in the near future. So these ones we were intending to replace several years from now, but we just moved them up in the process. Okay. And it's the 2006 Gillick, is that correct? Buses. Most of them are up in Ogden, but we'll just transfer them down.
And does that mean, and I think it's a great thing, but I assume the remaining 35% is cheaper than if we bought new buses?
We're looking at it, it may be a wash
Okay.
because the electric buses are a lot more expensive, and then the infrastructure that we have to buy.
Okay. All right. Questions or?
So when you said that most of them are up in Ogden, but that they would be transferred down, does this mean it's going to be, you know, throughout the entire system for that application for those new buses, or is it just focused on one area?
Yeah, the application said they would be for new buses in the Salt Lake County area. And just to clarify, this is just our notice of intent to proceed. Once we get costs for the buses and for the infrastructure, we may be able to scale that back if we think it'll be more than we have programmed.
Yeah. Any other questions in this regard? Okay. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion on this resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve Resolution 2019-0804, authorizing the execution of a certification of intent to participate in the Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Trust Funding Assistance Program for the replacement of diesel buses.
Second.
I have a motion and second on the resolution. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is our items on contracts, disbursements, and grant. And Mary, it looks like you have Amendment 1 to the Memorandum of Understanding with the University of Utah for Union Building Bus Bays.
Yes, so if you recall, 2 weeks ago, the board had passed a resolution allowing the interim executive director to sign an MOU with the University of Utah to fund the local match portion of the grant project for the construction of the bus bays at the U of U Union Building. And at that time, we thought we just put in, we didn't know what the final cost would be. We didn't have design yet. So we put in the cost of the grant into that MOU, and we said in the MOU that if cost increased, that the partners would work together to come up with that difference. And since that time, the design has been finished. It came in actually about 200,000 more, 200,000 to 23, I believe. And the U has agreed to cover the 200,000. We'll be on the hook for the 223, but they're covering the 200, whatever. Yeah, I can't see without my glasses here. Sorry. So the MOU is just to put that in writing that they'll pay that additional amount.
Questions on this?
Mary, I do actually have a question. Do they have a more definitive time frame now that they have started the process, finished the analysis and everything?
I'll ask Greg Turner to come up here if he could answer that.
Morning, Gray.
Morning. Yes, so the scheduling with the U. Because of the following the process, and this is the first week of school, the contractor's ready to go, but because this is at the heart of the campus, right in front of the student building, we are holding off construction this week, and we'll be starting next week. They do have some temporary traffic control up there to get people used to having one lane around the loop. Our buses are in detour mode along with the university shuttles that they are dropping off on the east side of the loop instead of the west side. So come Monday morning, we were going to start Friday, but apparently there is an event at the Union Building that they have rented the entire parking lot there. And so we need the north third of it for construction staging. And so we just decided that we would wait until Monday and they'll start full speed ahead on Monday morning. Once that happens, then we're looking at about a 5-week construction time. So
That's relatively fast.
That's pretty quick,
Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion on this amendment.
I move that we approve one to the Memorandum of Understanding with the University of Utah.
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. That brings us to change order for the on-call maintenance task order number 85, also on the University of Utah building bays.
Correct.
Space
So
project.
the resolution that was approved 2 weeks ago also gave authority to the interim executive director to sign a contract with Stacy Witbeck, our on-call contractor, to complete the work, but it was only for the amount of up to the $399,000. And when the actual cost came back, it actually came in at about $740,000. We engineered it down to about the $600,000 amount, $599,693. And so since the authority was only for Steve to sign up to $399,400, we're coming back here now to have the full amount of the contract approved for the $599,693.
Any questions on this item?
Yes, I have a question. Because we're making a transition from an interim executive director to a permanent executive director, as I reviewed the packet, it still had Steve's signature block, I think, on that agreement.
Did it?
I'm assuming now that it will be changed to reflect
Yes,
Carolyn's.
we'll fix that. Nice catch. Thank you.
Yeah, if you would be sure that that gets changed. And I realize that we were moving forward at one time with an interim director with Steve, and now we have Carolyn here. And I noticed that as I was reading through that, we need to change that signature block. I think that's the only one.
Okay.
There might be one other one later on, too, that had the same thing. We were working with the interim and we need to change the signature block, so check those carefully if you would.
Okay, we'll do that. And then also just to mention, because we did want to start some of that work, like the traffic control and other things Gray mentioned, we did issue a DAP for just to get that work started. So that will be closed out with this contract being signed.
I move approval of this change order, task order number 85 with the University of Utah.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second on this change order for the contract with Stacy and Witbeck. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you. Mary, you have a contract with Davis Salt Lake City Community Connector Bus Rapid Transit Project Engineering and Design Services. That is the longest name.
Who comes up with these names?
Yeah, so this is for the Davis Salt Lake Community Connector project. It's a BRT project that I think some of you are familiar with it, but it's a 11.8 mile BRT project with 5.6 miles of exclusive guideway. It would have 10 to 15 minute headways with a capital cost estimated at between $75 and $85 million at this time. This is to move forward. The locally preferred alternative had been approved several years ago by the partners. This is to move forward with doing the environmental and conceptual design services for that project. The funding is $1.2 million came from Davis County through legislative appropriation, and that will be what's paying for the project.
Any questions on this? Seeing none, I'll turn to Trustee Holbrook for
I
motion.
am so excited to
Yeah,
make this.
she's ready to do it.
I was waiting for you to finish your sentence. I move that we approve this contract for the Davis Salt Lake City Community Connector Bus Rapid Transit Project Engineering and Design Services.
Second?
I have a motion and a second on this contract with AECOM Technical Services. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Next item up, Mary, thank you. The Depot District Clean Fuels Technology Center Construction Manager, General Contractor, Phase 2, Change Order 2 for demolition and hazardous waste abatement with Big D Construction.
Right, so this is for a Big D contractor who is doing the demolition of the building behind us here for the Depot District. The initial amendment we did was just to remove the back portion and do all the abatement inside the building because it was still up in the air whether we were going to demolish that building or not. Now that it sounds like we're on board, we're going to demolish that building. This is to do the hazardous waste abatement. If you saw the scaffolding up front, there's asbestos in that paint there, so they're removing that and then to demolish that building.
Okay. That's why the structure's still standing. I mean, I was looking at that the other day and it seems pretty hollowed out, but I was kind of surprised to not see part of it down, but apparently we're.
Right, we have to
stuff.
do all that asbestos removal first. Right.
Okay. And so this contract is actually with Big D, and then I guess they use their subs? Or,
Correct.
okay.
I did notice on the contract that it actually includes, I think initially it didn't include some of the capping of some of the utilities, and now it does. So that was kind of a change that was in there. Is that correct?
I'm not sure of the detail, but probably there were some little changes. It had been given as an option in the first GMP, which we didn't proceed, and it went up because of some minor changes, so that's probably one of them. That and insurance and bonding changed.
Other questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I move approval of the change order for the Depot District Clean Fuels Technology Center construction.
I'll second.
Motion and a second on this change order with Big D Construction. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes. Okay, thank you, Mary. Next up, Nicole Bordeaux will talk to us about the 2019 OnBoard survey with Resource Systems Group.
Good morning. I'm here presenting on the contract for the OnBoard survey. I think you saw this in the pre-procurement, but the survey is to be conducted by our customer experience group, and our purpose is to determine the demographic profile of our ridership, comparing our minority and our non-minority ridership patterns, as well as our low income and fare equity. The total contract is just a little bit under $500,000. So this is something we do every 5 years as required by our Title VI circular. So.
Okay. Can I ask a question? So the fare medium usage is intriguing, and particularly in light with our fare discussion and looking about, how people are accessing and subsequently paying for the system.
Right.
What's the time frame of them completing this survey?
Probably spring of 2020 completely.
Okay.
And looking at some of the fare data, this is probably really good information for you to see who's using what, how they're using cash, how they're using all of our different mediums. It'd be great for you to have that information because right now what we have is a little old, a little dated. So we should have that by February.
And how do they physically do the survey?
It's the reason why it's so expensive is we're actually hiring people to sit on our platforms and ask people questions. So it's bodies. So that's where you're seeing the cost. So they're out there asking these questions and then they calculate that data.
I'm just curious. Oh,
Go ahead, Beth, please.
I'm just curious if they get it back in by roughly spring of 2020. Is there an opportunity? How does that integrate with any potential change days or any other components? Because I would assume that I would actually, by the time you analyze the data, it's going to miss the August 2020 change day. So does that impact it at all? Do you look at things like that, or is it more just for the data itself?
Well, there's a couple of things. So our Title VI, as part of 2020 Change Day, we will always do a Title VI analysis. So there's the planning process that goes along with that, but also we do some kind of summary. So there'll probably be some way to influence our 2020 planning, but it will also go into our 5-year mobility plan. So our planners will be taking this data in consideration when they come to you to present long-term, every 2 years, what does that demographic look like for us? So they're still using some of this data as the demographics, like we know that 50% of our riders are low income. And that's the 5-year assessment that we have from before. So they take that in consideration, but each time they're changing a route, we're reassessing that using the ACS and the census data. So they take a lot of the information we have and use that as they do the Title VI analysis for each change day. So some of it they'll take into consideration, but they have to do the assessment for each change day that they bring to you. And Andrew does that when he comes to present with you, and that's really what goes into the change day analysis for you as part of the Title VI analysis, which is right there for you to make that decision on what we're doing.
Will this be across all modes, the bus, light rail, and front runner?
Yes, I believe so.
Will it include paratransit and our van pools as well?
I think so. We get that data as well, but I'll have to check to make sure. But I believe it's all modes that we have to look
Okay,
into.
thank you.
And I'm sure there was a lot of, just because it's such a large contract, is there some attributes about resource systems that, I mean,
there is.
Own this market, or?
They do kind of own this market. They're actually, Resource has done it for us for the last 2 years, but they generally have done this for quite a few transit agencies, CTA and MTA, and they have a lot of international expertise. And one of the things you do see with these large surveys is that they've worked in this kind of federal realm and have the ability to get people out and really collect the data that helps us inform us and also hit our federal regulations that we need to do. So they've been good to us over the years, and we did a full procurement too as well. So yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
If there are none, I'll entertain a motion on the contract.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the contract for the 2019 onboard survey with Resource Systems Group.
Have a motion and a second. Other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you, Nicole. Next item up is a contract for inventory parts for light rail vehicle Pantograph overhaul and with Siemens. Eddie and
Thank you. I have Kyle Stockley with me this morning. This procurement is with Siemens Mobility for parts necessary to remanufacture the pantographs on all light rail vehicles. Total contract cost is $611,018.80. These parts were put out for bid and awarded based on lowest price. As a reminder, the pantograph is that contact mechanism that transferred power from the overhead wire to the vehicle. All three light rail vehicles, or all light rail fleets, 117 vehicles, are due for either a quarter or half-life overhaul as part of the light rail overhaul program. This procurement is for the 56 individual parts required to perform the task, and all labor will be conducted by existing UTA personnel. Any questions?
So I know that we're going through our overhauls right now on obviously the interiors, the exteriors, and the pantographs. Are we just ordering the 56 for the continued? Have we already done this in the past? Where are we at in that overhaul, whole entire overhaul program?
So on the pantographs, this is the next scheduled activity. So we've already done the quarter life overhaul on the older SD 100s and 160s, and now this is the next more intensive maintenance activity for those. And then on the S70s, this is the first quarter life overhaul for those. Correct. So they're landing at the same time.
sorry. How often do you replace pantographs?
We really don't replace them unless we have a catastrophic incident. So they do last a long time, and by overhauling them, it does extend the life of those.
So these are just parts; they're not necessarily the whole mechanism.
No, it's just the overhaul parts to extend the overall component of that on the vehicle.
Okay. It made me look really smart for the first time in my life the other day when I cited the word pantograph to my friends and explained what they were. For the first time, the light shot up that maybe I had some elements of brightness. Anyway, did you have a question?
No, that answered my question.
All right. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion on this contract.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we approve the contract for the inventory parts for light rail vehicle pantograph overhaul with Siemens.
Second?
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. And then that brings us to the next piece. It's also part of the overhaul with the coupler quarter life overhaul. And, Eddie and Kyle.
Yeah, so this contract is to purchase the necessary parts for UTA in-house mechanics to perform the quarter life overhaul of the couplers on 77 UTA S70 light rail vehicles. Total contract value is $669,919. Just as a reminder, the coupler is the mechanical and electrical connection between light rail vehicles that allows you to move cars to connect and disconnect. Siemens Mobility was the selected supplier based upon price and lead time. Any questions on this particular contract?
That led me to one question is are there sort of other aftermarket suppliers, or do you pretty much have to go with the original manufacturer?
So there are other aftermarket suppliers. In fact, they use a Dellner as a sub for some of the more technical pieces on there. And so, but we do have a vendor list of all the aftermarket plus the OEMs that we do put out the procurement to hopefully get a better procurement or at least a more competitive procurement for our overhaul activities.
Yeah.
Is this part of the contractual arrangement that we have with other transit agencies as well, so that we can get a better deal, or is this a separate type of scenario because of these particular vehicles?
It's a separate procurement.
Okay.
I don't know that we've added couplers to that list. I know what you're referring to, and we've looked at really major components, but I don't think that couplers has been a part of that discussion to this point.
Yeah, and we're still trying to iron out that agreement to bring to you.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions on this contract? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion for this contract.
I move approval of the contract for the light rail vehicle coupler quarter life overhaul parts with Siemens.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. That brings us next to a revenue contract amendment for wheel truing services and provided by UTA to the Sonoma-Marin Area Transit District.
Thank you. This is a revenue contract between UTA and Sonoma-Marin Area Rail Transit District, also known as SMART. This contract is for wheel truing services for the light rail fleet. This amendment continues provisions of service through June 30th, 2020. And just to provide a little background, truing returns the wheels to their original profile, eliminates noise, and provides a more comfortable ride. That's something that's done on a periodic basis. The amendment amount is $261,100 and brings the total contract value to $384,113.76. And the reason for this is that SMART doesn't currently own or have access to wheel truing equipment, and UTA has extra capacity to provide these services with our current staffing. So,
And welcome, Jeff. I remember when we were touring the facility, I think they were truing a set of wheels at the time, and commented about, that this is a little bit unusual for us to have this capability. When we do something like this, are we picking up a little more than our cost and time? Is there some sort of additional compensation, or not that you'd be trying to rob them blind, but are we?
Right.
It's not a charitable act of kindness toward another transit agency.
we're definitely recovering all of our cost.
Okay.
I don't know that we're making a substantial profit on it, but we are. Do you have anything to add to that? Yeah, I don't think that we're making a substantial profit, but we are definitely recovering all of our cost.
Okay. And does that, I assume the cost means potential repairs to the machinery?
does.
Because I hate to think that we're not getting something for the wear.
Right.
It is on.
Oh, okay, it is. Yeah, that includes maintenance costs, repair costs, repair of the bits that true the wheels, and then there's a depreciation that's included in there for the machine itself.
Okay.
It's approximately $910 per axle is what we charge.
And do we do this for other agencies besides SMART?
Not yet. No.
Not yet.
We could if others approached us. SMART approached us back in 2016, and we worked with the FTA and with Sonoma-Marin to establish this contract. But we could do this for other agencies, possibly.
But FTA had to be part of that process.
Yes.
And that's a requirement.
Yes, the wheel truing machine was purchased in 2011 or 2010 as part of the Mid-Jordan project, and that was with using FTA monies, and so we had to get FTA approval to use that truing machine to true another agency's axles.
So potentially that's the same process, should there be another agency that would request that. Thanks.
Other questions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion on this revenue contract.
I move that we approve the revenue contract amendment for the wheel truing services provided by UTA to Sonoma-Marin Area Rail Transit District.
Second.
I have a motion and a second on the revenue contract. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you. And then have a pre-procurement coming up, Eddie.
Yes, this is pre-procurement to contract with a bulk fuel provider for all 6 UTA locations that dispense fuel for a period of 5 years. Current bulk fuel contract expires December 31st, 2019. And as you know, fuel is our second largest expense, and the price has been volatile over the years. This initiative will give us the opportunity to see if fuel hedging is advantageous for the organization. Fuel hedging is something we have not done in the past. In the past, we've simply paid market value at time of order. This will be an RFP procurement, and selection will be based on technical criteria and price.
I remember throwing out the suggestion, or at least the discussion, if it turns out to be a bad idea, when you get responses, do you just, I guess, have the option of going back to?
Absolutely. That's something that I'm sure Bob and his team will analyze and tell us how that fits in the long term and whether it makes sense or not.
And because hedging really is a budget strategy.
Sure.
And trying to narrow the variances in your budget, but there's a cost to that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it'll be interesting to see how it turns out. So, thank you.
Thank you.
That next brings us to service and fare approvals. And first line item up in 11A is a complimentary S-line service for Sugar House backyard bash on August 31st. Good morning, Monica.
Hi, good morning. So yes, today I'm requesting approval on 3 items that fall within the newly approved board fare policy. I also have Andreas Coleman and Andrea Packer as backups that can also provide more details to the event if necessary. The first one is a marketing promotion opportunity to partner with the Sugar House Community Council. This will be offering fares in exchange for a marketing package. This is an opportunity for residents to be able to ride the S-Line and promote ridership to this event. It's a Sugar House Big Backyard Bash that will be happening on August 31st.
And is this only on is it only on the S-Line itself, I assume?
It would just be on the S-Line for that day. So to arrive at the estimated value, we took a look at APC ridership and determined how many people we felt normally ride on a Saturday, and we increased that and then applied the $2.50 fare.
Okay. So it'd be fairly low, and it certainly would be kind of local residents because everybody else would have to connect somehow and have paid a normal fare, right?
Correct. Anybody outside of the area that could potentially attend would still probably, if they took tracks to get there, would already have paid and just show their, well, we wouldn't be inspecting on that day for that line, but anybody riding, a connection or a bus to get there would pay.
Yeah. Okay.
And that'll make enforcement simple.
Any questions?
I have a question. I noticed that there is some type of an acknowledgement in terms of the marketing strategy and getting our name out there as one of the sponsors for that, which I think is fantastic. I think it's really great for the communities as a whole to see some of the things that we're doing in terms of community, complimentary passes and other things like that. So I just wanted to say thanks. I think that's a very good add to that.
Other questions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion on this complimentary offer on item A.
Mr. Chair, I move approval of the complimentary S-Line service for August 31st.
I'll second.
Motion and a second for the complimentary service on the S-Line. Any other discussions? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes. That brings us down to Peach Days.
Yes, Peach Days. So we have an opportunity every year to participate in Peach Days. This allows us to partner with Box Elder County and Brigham City, and essentially we'll be providing shuttle, and we'll also have a bus in the parade. Residents, we have about 3,500 riders, well, 3,300 to 3,500 riders that use the shuttle, so it's a very popular event. The value would, of course, be the cost just to run the service, and we're estimating that at approximately $2,000.
Now, is this just in Brigham City itself?
Correct.
The shuttle is just around Brigham City. It's not bringing people from outside the area.
It's not, no.
It's just local to the various venues around Brigham City.
Correct.
Okay.
So on these things, and you said that the shuttle is in the parade or something's in the parade?
Yeah, we do. We'll have a trolley bus in the parade, and that's fun for employees and everybody to participate in the community to see the trolley
Oh,
bus.
good. So that part of, I guess, because on the previous contract, we had some of the, ability to do a little bit of a marketing and just say, hey, compliments of UTA. And I'm assuming that's a similar thing in this event?
I'm not sure. Andreas could probably speak to that a little bit better.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Good morning. So we get a lot of people seeing us. There's tens of thousands of people that attend Peach Days, and they see us involved in this event. Not only the bus and the parade, but the actual shuttles themselves. And to your question, sir, we shuttle from a designated parking location just on the edge of the city into the actual Peach Days event. So people can park off-site and then ride the shuttle in. We also get a full-page ad in the Peach Days Queen Pageant brochure, correct.
Great.
And so that's the promotional opportunity for us.
And when is Peach Days? Sorry.
Looks like
September 7th?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, sorry. I guess I should read the headline more.
We don't
Thank
get
you.
a bushel of peaches to go over that free
We
page?
don't, no. We do get a lot of gratitude from the community, and this is a great opportunity for us
Super.
to provide an employee engagement opportunity, also an community engagement event.
Thank you.
Well, we like peaches.
Yes, yes, we do.
Any other questions? Okay.
I move approval of this complimentary bus service for Peach Days, September the 7th, up in Brigham City.
I will second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes. That then brings us to sponsored fare by Salt Lake City for routes 29 and 21.
Yes, so the last item we have here is an opportunity to partner with Salt Lake City. They've expressed interest in sponsoring routes 29 and 29, and this would be because we have extra service now on these lines. And so they've approached us with interest, and we would like approval at the pricing of $5,962 per day. We calculated this pricing by, again, taking the average weekday ridership on those routes and combining that ridership, and then again multiplying the fare of $250.
So our understanding is whatever days are later agreed upon, Salt Lake City would, in this case, would actually pay UTA to offer the free service.
They would, and so whether it's 1 day, 5 days, whatever number of days, they would pay us for those days, and then riders on those routes and those routes alone, we would not be collecting a fare from them.
Now, the $6,000 a day is for all three routes?
Correct, all three.
Okay, so they will designate all three routes as being free on a given day or a number of days, and then they would just reimburse us. That's roughly $6,000 a day.
Correct. And this is a great opportunity for riders, since we do have the increased service, to be able to promote these routes, promote the increased service. Salt Lake City has expressed interest in being willing to sponsor that fare. So if you approve of this, then we will go back to them and continue discussions and put a contract in place.
I just wanted to compliment Salt Lake City on their the brochures that they have in place as well, which are incredibly detailed about the local areas and each of those routes service. And I just thought that was really great. And I think it's a really great opportunity to do partnerships in general. So I just wanted to say that. But thank you for working on this so hard.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion on this particular sponsored fare.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we approve the sponsored fare by Salt Lake City for routes 29 and 21 as presented.
Second?
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thanks, Monica.
Thank you.
I was just looking. Okay. Why don't we, I'm just wondering, do you think wondering if we should take just a 5-minute break and then come back to this and the risk management. And then, so we'll gather again just after 10:10. Thank you.
adjustments as we went through this year as we made decisions on how to use those funds. So this one includes some personnel, for instance, to do some of the capital development work that's for those funds that we allocated in budget amendment number 2. We're going to need another project manager position in Mary's area. And so this is the 2019 estimated cost is about $60,000. We've been having lots of discussions about the micro-transit pilot project. And so for this year, it's about $925,000 for just that part of it. One of the interesting things on this is for NTD reporting, a pilot project shows up as administration. So you'll see in the budget, it's coded as administration. At the point that it stops being a pilot, then it actually becomes its own reporting structure in NTD. So,
can I ask a question? So the capital development project position, that's just the 2019 portion of the salary?
Correct.
Do you know what the fully loaded value is going to be?
I do. For next year, we're estimating it's about $144,000.
Okay. And can I ask, so I know we've had a recent retirement, and I'm assuming that position will be filled. Is this in addition to?
This is in addition to.
Okay. And is the nature of the work then the facilities for the enhanced services, or sort of what's the task of the capital or project manager?
You know, Mary could probably answer that a little bit better than I could.
If that's okay. I'm just trying to get a scope of were we just behind before and we're taking advantage of an opportunity of new revenue?
No, as part of the Salt Lake County fourth quarter, we are programming, I believe, $1 million for bus stop improvements and $600,000 for operator restrooms. So this is more support to help get that work done.
Okay. It's really work you weren't doing before.
Correct.
Okay.
And as we talk about these particular reallocations, one of the things that we're watching is a certain amount of those funds were set aside for administration. So we're carefully monitoring what we're asking you to approve and how that impacts the overall allocation percentage. So even with these positions for this year, we're about $300,000 under that particular allocation. We'll take a look at the 2020 budget and see what's included in that. Right now, we're about $1 million under, but we haven't looked at all of the requests yet for 2020.
Yeah.
So we are tracking those.
Okay.
The same thing with customer service positions. Those are two new positions. For this year, it's about $50,000, but there's also some software that would provide some information to customers who want to know about specific route information and keep them up to date as things are changing in the system. And then we have a culture and talent development person for in the CPO area to assist with bus training. We have trainers right now. This would offload the administrative work for the trainers and let them spend more time training all the bus operators that we're hiring.
Can I ask a question on the customer service positions? And I don't doubt that if we add service that would increase, but it's my understanding that at least for a year, we probably won't add any service, and the real service won't come for 2 years. So what sort of necessitates the hiring? The software piece I understand, because software takes forever to implement and acquire. But how come you need 2 positions for customer service at this point?
Well, I'll ask Nicole to come and speak to that one. She's more familiar with the details.
So this is part of improving our service in Salt Lake County. One of the things that we're looking to do as a customer experience is provide detour and disruptive information for our customers. So as part, right now, our customers do not get detour or disruption information for our team. So right now, we'd have our ECCSs. We expand our team for...
Tell me what ECCS is.
I'm probably the worst, but it's our electronic customer communications people. And right now, they use Twitter. to alert our customers of route disruptions, things that are going on. But our bus system doesn't have a team that would alert them to technology of when you have a detour route or when our detours are snow routing or there's a disruption in our service. And so we're looking to change that customer experience from just being alerted through Twitter, but actually having a system that we would go out for RFP that would alert them and people could sign up. So you would sign up and say, I take Route 2 every day. And this would alert them and they can have contact as well 24 hours a day. So it would be Monday through Sunday. Also, what we would be providing is an emergency contact on Sunday right now. So we only have customer service Monday through Saturday. So on Sundays, when someone calls and says, I'm stranded, it just rings. And we haven't been able to provide an emergency call. So this is basically to improve our service, customer service for Salt Lake County as we ramp up the service going forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And I wasn't aware of this Sunday absence. So what happens, because we equally care and love about people that are there not Sunday service in the other counties, or how does that work? Does that roll into the same center?
They actually, our supervisors take care of that, and and the customer service agents don't report to my team.
Okay.
They report to the RGMs.
Oh, I see.
So we don't support them
Okay.
in that system.
Okay. That leads me to another question, but it's probably not related to this. I just, why that is, and I mean, yeah, okay. Well, we'll get into that when we get to the budget, I guess. So that'll be helpful to understand better. I mean, it strikes me we ought to have a fairly seamless system because, yeah, people are getting on wherever, and so anyway. We should think through that a little bit. So.
And I knew Nicole could answer your questions better than I could. So the last item here is with the transition from our legal staff to the AG's office. Personnel, there was a discussion earlier this year about which work goes to which entity. And so the AG's office is handling the true legal work, and UTA is handling the work that legal used to do that was more administrative in nature. A lot of that had to do with contracts and procurement. Bart Siemens spent a lot of time in that area. And so this is moving that position from legal over to the supply chain area so we can do more of the administrative work on the contracts. So this is what it looks like as far as changing the budget, operations support.
May I ask one question on that? So there was some positions in legal, and the change makes a lot of sense, but is there not salary to shift over from that, former attorney or?
Yes, there is. So there were two positions that came over to UTA. For this particular year, we budgeted half of the full-time positions. It just happens that the full cost of this position next year is equal to the half of a year cost of the legal staff that we budgeted this year.
Okay, thank you.
So again, operations support, general administrative, and then the big change in the Salt Lake County service where that's being reallocated. So the operating expense, it's actually reduction that shows up over in the non-operating. And so the net impact is zero on the total amount of the budget. And from here, what happens is next week you'll get a resolution considering the approval of this particular amendment.
Questions on this particular one? Okay, thanks for that information. And then that brings us to a discussion on insurance and risk management report and day picture. is with us today.
Yeah, and I'm going to lead this out and introduce Dave Pitcher, who's our claim and insurance manager. The way this works is we have a contract with an insurance broker who then goes and procures the insurance. Dave has been working on that diligently for the last few months, and we wanted to report on the outcome of that. And particularly, we wanted to make sure that we were addressing the risk management areas in your board policy. So Dave's going to talk about each of these areas today. We'll talk about the actual insurance, which is the last two of these items, and then Dave will get a little bit of background on the risk management and the work that's going on there. So I'll turn it over to Dave.
Thank you. So just by way of introduction, I've been with UTA for 23 years. The claims and insurance manager, part of my responsibilities are to manage UTA's self-insurance program, which includes our claims handling, the corporate insurance program, which is what I'm going to be talking about today, contractual risk transfer, accident review classifications, program compliance for charter bus service, and administration of the Railroad Protective Liability Program. I also work with safety and security on trending problems and consult with other departments at UTA on risk issues. So I'm here to present to the board how UTA is meeting the requirements of Board Policy 2.1, and there are three parts to this. The first part I'm just going to touch on briefly. That is the Executive Director will submit an annual report to the Board of Trustees on the status of the authority's risk management program. The other two will be the main focus of my presentation. The authority's maintaining of public officials' errors and omissions coverage, and the other insurance that UTA procures. The former Risk and Compliance Officer, Lisa Bowman, had been tasked with reviewing UTA's risk management program. And she began the process by putting out an RFP for a consultant to review, assess, and make recommendations to UTA on a comprehensive enterprise risk management program. The internal auditor, the compliance officer, and myself reviewed the proposals and selected a consultant. But when Lisa left UTA, the contract was put on hold. I've just been recently asked to move the contract forward in the interim, and we've sent the contract to the consultant that was selected for their review and signature. A comprehensive enterprise risk management evaluation will look at the areas that are listed here and how UTA is applying risk management techniques to each of these areas. The consultant will then make recommendations to assist the board and UTA management in making decisions on focus and investment of risk management and mitigation efforts. These are the basic risk management techniques that are applied to manage risks. We all use these techniques in our daily lives, and UTA uses them. The board uses them in making decisions on how to manage risk. These techniques are applied based on the frequency and severity of expected losses in combination with an assessment of the benefits of undertaking an activity versus the costs of undertaking an activity. The other two parts of the board's risk management policy deal directly with the item in red there, and that's the financial transfer of risk, or in other words, financing risk through the purchase of insurance. The second part of the risk management policy considers two things. One is the maintaining of public officials' errors and omissions coverage, and purchasing limits that are adequate to protect UTA. This is our current program, and historically, UTA's maintained $5 million in limits for this policy, which covers both public officials' errors and omissions coverage and employment practices liability coverage. The $5 million is when benchmarked benchmarked against other agencies of our size is an industry standard. So our last year's premium was $126,000 for this coverage. This is our renewal proposal. It's with the same insurance carrier. The policy limits here are the same. After marketing the coverage and negotiating with the carrier, we're able to get the premium down by 13% to $110,000. On the left-hand side of the graphic, there are some renewal options. We can purchase for $11,000 an extra $1 million in defense cost coverage, which for public officials, E&O, and EPLI that's the big part of the costs that the insurance will cover. Stratford Insurance also offered us a $2 million quote, which we wanted to explore because while $5 million is adequate coverage, we do have a $10 million blanket excess policy sitting on top of this coverage. So $5 million is probably more than we need. So we could drop this to a $2 million primary policy and save some money there.
And I remember having at one time a personal liability policy, but it required you to have so much under that base policy. Does $2 million get you there?
Yes, and I'll show you a graph that indicates where the drop down is for that blanket excess policy. It starts after a $2 million primary, so it covers several of our liability policies and our self-insurance program. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But because of this $10 million blanket excess policy, my recommendation would be to lower the limits to $2 million and add the additional defense coverage of $1 million. And this would save the agency approximately $34,000 and still provide adequate limits. There is on this new policy an endorsement that the broker has talked to the insurance carrier about, and they're willing to add it to the policy. Initially, it looks like it's bad for UTA. It's called a non-duty to defend endorsement. But what it actually does, is it allows us to use the AG's office to defend these types of claims. And I've talked to the AG's office, and they do this defense work for all the state public officials. And so with them defending, the insurance carrier would still reimburse us the cost of their defense, but we could use the AG's office to defend these cases. So that's a bit of an advantage. The endorsement is a little scary, but I've reviewed the endorsement, and they do still reimburse us the cost of defense on that. So that would be my recommendation. So the third part of this risk management policy has to do with the evaluation and procurement of insurance to cover losses that are, which are best managed with insurance at UTA. So we'll start with this block of liability policies, which, as you can see, sits under our $10 million blanket excess liability policy. The blanket excess coverage is going up a little bit this year, and that's not because of a rate increase, but it's because of exposure increases. So we expect that to happen as UTA continues to grow. So sitting under this on the right-hand side, you can see is our public officials E&O, which we just talked about, and the premium there at $121,000. It's different than what I showed on the other graphic, but I've included the $11,000 for the $1 million defense cost on that. If we drop this to a $2 million coverage, which we can do, we'd save overall about $76,000 on this, or the premium would be about $76,000, which would be about a 45% savings. So we'd be saving about $45,000 on this coverage. Then next to that, you've got our auto and general liability coverage, which we have a $2 million self-insured retention, and all the claims under those two coverages are handled in-house by our own claims staff. So we've chosen to retain this loss, and losses that are frequent, less severe, and are predictable are best handled by self-insuring it. Some entities choose to use a third-party adjusting company. We choose to handle it in-house. It gives us more control over the claims, and I think it gives us a better experience with the public. So, historically, we relied on governmental immunity caps to put a stop limit on our self-insured exposures. But as the cap erodes and there are holes in the Governmental Immunity Act, a few years ago we decided we needed to purchase this blanket excess liability policy to cover those holes. Police professional liability, the premium will be going down this year by about 9% on our police professional liability. We have $2 million in coverage under the $10 million blanket and a $50,000 deductible. We've had one claim under this policy. It was quite a few years ago, and no payment was made. It was denied. So good experience with our police officers. Next to that is our premises liability. We carry this coverage mainly because of our contract with the LDS Church for use of some of their parking lots for park and rides. So the contract with the church has required us to carry a premises liability policy. Again, I think we've only had one claim on this, and it was handled by the MedPay coverage that is in this policy. So we also cover some of our other properties with this policy, but most of our facilities are self-insured for premises.
Can I ask a question about that? Well, I have two questions for you, and I think that if I'm following you correctly on the auto liability, does that include our van pool?
No.
Okay.
I'll talk about that.
Okay. And then one question I have, self-insured, but as much as this building's an architectural wonder, if something happened to it, coming up with the dollars is the assumption that we then could go out and bond cheaper than the collective premiums to insure it up to some kind of catastrophic circumstance.
Right. So I'll be talking about property insurance in a minute, and yeah, we can take a look at that.
Okay.
Because property's gone up substantially this year, so it's certainly something to consider.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So this is our largest liability policy, and it's our rail liability policy. We carry this coverage because of our operations and maintenance agreement with Union Pacific. They require us to carry $100 million in liability insurance and name them as an additional insured. Because of the governmental immunity caps, we could almost operate without this coverage because of the cap limitations that we're protected by. But because of our agreement with UP, we have it. You can see that our premium this year is down 7%. With the new policy this year, it's written on an occurrence reported basis, and Union Pacific's contract required that the policy be an occurrence policy. So we went to Union Pacific and discussed it with them, and they've agreed to change the contract and allow an occurrence reported, which is kind of a hybrid of a claims made and an occurrence policy. And so this will save us money. A lot of the rail liability carriers are going to that type of trigger on insurance policies, so it makes sense. In fact, Union Pacific, their own coverage as an occurrence reported policy. So they were willing to let us do that. We also had them clarify the insurance requirements and to determine whether that $100 million included the self-insured retention, and they clarified that it did. So we have the opportunity to drop our excess rail liability from $75 million to $70 million, and that will save us another $35,000. So we're going to do that. We've been resistant in the past to procuring terrorism coverage on our liability policy for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's expensive. It's about $20,000 a year to carry it. And number two, the definition of a terrorist act is so narrow that the chances that it would ever happen were not worth the costs. However, there is that exposure, and if we could obtain a broader terrorism coverage, then it would be something to consider. So we're exploring a standalone terrorism coverage that would not only apply to our rail liability, but would apply to our other operations too. So we think it's worthwhile to take a look at that, and we should be getting a quote on that in the next few days. So our workers' comp, we have $1 million self-insured retention on workers' comp. We have never had a claim go to our excess work comp carrier. Just a little bit about work comp. We have about 215 injuries reported every year. About 116 of those turn into claims. We average about 83 medical-only claims and 33 lost time claims under our work comp. You'll notice that on this $1 million deductible, there's a $325,000 cash flow limit. That means that if we have $1 million loss in any one year, the most we'll have to pay is $325,000, and that would be stretched over the number of years it takes us to pay the $1 million deductible. So when we made that jump from $500,000 to $1 million deductible, we got that cash flow limit, so that helped us out. Helped us feel a little bit better about making that jump. So the next slide is our cyber liability coverage and our property coverage. And property is one of the ones that really took a jump this year. Initially, Affiliated FM, who's been our insurance carrier for as long as I can remember, dropped us. And we tried to get them to, we asked why, and they provided us reasons, and we responded to all of their reasons. One of their biggest ones was the lack of fire protection in the buildings behind FLHQ, and we explained to them, they're gone. They will no longer be there. And there were a few other things that we addressed through facilities, and every time we responded, they still said they were declining to renew the coverage. So we moved forward under that assumption, and actually the $380,000 indication that I've got up there, it was just an indication. We've gotten a quote from the Utah Local Governments Trust, and it's gone up actually to $403,000, which is a 65% increase over last year's premium. They do offer some better limits, but it's still a huge hit. On the good news side, we did get, I did get a phone call from our broker yesterday or 2 days ago that Affiliated has now come back and is starting to talk to them about possibly quoting us again. I think they took a look at how much the premium's going up and thought, oh, well, we can jump into that. So I think they're going to quote us again. I think it will be quite a bit less than the 65% increase we're looking at, which will be good. But so far I haven't heard. So the 403,000 is kind of the bad news. It'll only get better from there. So
are we, I assume we're still covered by Affiliated I mean,
We
when you
are.
say that dropped us, I just
Yeah.
assume that's on the renewal.
Right, yes. Yeah, we're covered until September 1st.
Okay.
One of the big expenses on this is the earthquake coverage, and Affiliate has kind of been tapering down our earthquake coverage for years, and while they're increasing our costs, with the Utah Local Governments Trust, they quoted us 185 million on earthquake, where we only had 100 million with Affiliated. And actually, the government's trust, after they quoted us the 403, said, well, we'll bump up the earthquake coverage to 220 million to try and make us feel a little bit better, which is good coverage, but it's still a huge amount of money to have to pay for that. So there are options of lowering that earthquake coverage and saving premium in the future if that's what we want to do. I talked to a colleague of mine in Los Angeles and said, what do you guys do for earthquake coverage? I mean, it's got to be really expensive for you guys. And he says, we don't carry it at all.
Yeah.
He said, if we have a big earthquake, FEMA will come in and they'll pay what needs to be paid to get us back on our feet. Of course, after that, then they have to carry the coverage. But, you know, we could take the same tactic and save a lot of money if we decided not to carry earthquake coverage. So.
Well, you know, one of the most painful decisions for me to make when I moved back into my family home, which was an unreinforced masonry home, was to drop my earthquake coverage. But and it's not that I don't think an earthquake's coming, I just had to weigh that long-term aspect of it. But I wondered a little bit, you know, if we've ever put some numbers to the fact of, you know, I mean, assuming that the building became unusable or something to that effect, you know, could we bond basically and, you know, looking at premiums, in knowing we've got to, I mean, if we're going to build a new building at some point in the future, that obviously would build to a much higher standard. And we would probably have to bond or use some kind of cash flow for that. Yeah, I just wondered if we've ever put some numbers to it and said, here's our real exposure and you know, and go from that.
No, we can work on that. You know, just a general rule of thumb on issuing bonds, you know, it depends on how long the time frame, but
Sure.
a 20-year, you're talking 7-8% of whatever the principal amount is for your annual payment. So I don't know what it would cost to replace this. Now, you updated assessed valuations for the property coverage this year too.
Right. Yeah, so we didn't do all of our properties, but we had 6 properties assessed this year. I'd like to be able to do the rest of our facilities next year to get an update on those, but those would help with understanding what our exposures would be.
Yeah.
So do we do those assessments? They're not just simply based on like market, but it's an actual assessment of the building itself, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, we hired a third-party appraisal service to come in and do those appraisals for us. So that's kind of one of the items of bad news in our renewal this year. Our cyber liability's gone down 10%. We've got $3 million there. If we did go with the Utah Local Governments Trust, they include a $2 million cyber liability coverage under their property policy. So that would actually give us 5. And I've always kind of felt like, after talking to our IT folks, that we were underinsured on cyber liability. If we had a breach, it could cost us a whole lot more than $3 million very quickly. But there's not a lot of excess market out there to cover it. So it'd be nice to have the combination and have $5 million that we could coordinate with. So now we get into the van pool coverage. So this one is the one that really has affected the overall renewal of our insurance program. We've kind of seen this coming for a while. This is a first dollar coverage on our rideshare program, and insurance companies don't like first dollar coverages. They like the insured to take ownership of some of that exposure. So it's, we've been fortunate for quite a few years that it's been fairly stable, but in the last probably 5 or 6 years, it's gone up steadily. And not only that, but the market for this coverage has shrunk. Nobody wants to insure a van pool fleet first dollar. So over the last few years, we've been talking to Cheryl and her, Cheryl Beveridge and her rideshare managers about taking on a self-insured retention on this coverage. And I think that we've been approaching it cautiously, and I think that's been good. We've had an actuary look at this. We've had a legal opinion on this. Since these are not our employees that are driving these vans, we have to be very careful because the Immunity Act does not cover this program. So, and we want to encourage people to take advantage of the rideshare program. If we do a self-insured retention, the state doesn't consider self-insurance as insurance. And so there's the potential that someone with a claim could go after the driver's own personal auto coverage. We would need to word the lease agreement in such a way that we could avoid that. That's why we got the legal opinion. Also, there's consideration of setting up reserves if we're going to carry a self-insured retention on this. And so we're working with the rideshare group to come up with a good solution to this, because this has gone up almost $250,000 this year, which is substantial. And so we really need to look at doing something to reduce the costs on this one. If we did a $250,000 self-insured retention on this, we have the potential of saving about $500,000 on the premium. And we could eliminate these two policies, the primary and excess policy, and that blanket policy that we have would drop down and cover everything cover $10 million over the $250,000 self-insured retention. Their cost would be about $200 something thousand to do that drop down, but you can see it would save us a substantial amount of money. And with the rideshare program, they've had about, I think, on an average, about 35 losses annually at an average cost of annually of about $140,000, which has been great, except last year. And I think that's why the premium went up so much. We had a really bad accident last year in the rideshare program. And I think, that's kind of what's triggered this huge increase this year. So, but I still think that the losses are predictable enough and the exposure is low enough that it makes sense to look at a self-insured retention on this program. And we could take on those losses and handle them in-house, so we wouldn't have to pay a third-party administrator to do that.
Can I ask a question in terms of what do other agencies do in this particular field? Do they do the self-insure portions of that, or do they just do the first dollar? How does that?
So
that's
a good question. And I can't answer that for you right now. I'd take a look at that and find out. But I think most of them self-insure, at least a portion of that. Otherwise, there'd be more of an appetite, I think, for this type of coverage. So I haven't really benchmarked that. There are entities that just subsidize rideshare. They don't actually run a rideshare program. They subsidize it with other agencies, like with other third-party rideshare programs like Enterprise. So anyway, there are a lot of options to this, but I think what makes sense right now is to look at self-insuring this. And I'll do some checking with other agencies and see what they're doing.
I was just thinking particularly in growth areas where you have your traffic's increasing, and obviously that's an impact on these types of costs. So yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
The only other thought I had, and you probably thought past it, which is could conceivably the driver become a part-time employee of UTA, and then that gives you some immunity cap if they're driving the vehicle and being paid, for 2 hours a day kind of thing.
Yeah.
At a minimum wage.
That's a good question. I don't know how that
may make the people office cringe.
Yeah.
But I just wondered. Otherwise, I like the self-insurance route. When you talked about that, and we're having to get a lot from the driver anyway. I mean, to be honest, verifying their driver's record and all that other information, unless there's a super high turnover, having them get a nominal wage to qualify.
Good to have a discussion on this with Cheryl in the room, since she and Mike Goldman, since they kind of run the program, and find out what those issues might be that would come up from doing something like that. The other coverage.
I'm just doing some numbers in my head. Expensive is the first word that comes to mind.
Expensive. See, I knew it was a bad idea that you'd already gotten past. So.
The other policy on here is our railroad protective liability policy. Just to explain to you quickly what that is, when we have contractors come out and work on our alignment, whether they're our contractors or say, Rocky Mountain Power or Dominion Gas, out working on our right of way, we require them to carry certain insurance coverages. But one coverage that we want to make sure they have is this railroad protective liability. Railroad protective liability is not a policy that insures the contractor. It insures UTA. So that $2 million occurrence, $6 million aggregate are dedicated limits to UTA on that project. So if a contractor's out working on our right of way and he has $1 million policy limit, but he has $1 million loss on one of his other projects, now all of a sudden we have no limits available to us. So we require them to carry this policy. We purchased a blanket railroad protective liability policy similar to what Union Pacific does, which allows contractors to enroll in our program and get this coverage if they can't afford. It's a very expensive coverage. So a small contractor, if they're doing work for us, it's going to really increase the cost of their contract. And if they're working for somebody else, they'll pass those costs along. But in some cases, it can cost more to get this coverage than the cost of the project they're doing. So we provide this coverage. They can enroll in it, and the minimum premium is only $500. So it's very affordable for them to enroll, and it provides us $2 million in coverage. So.
And I'm assuming that's based on the size of that contract, or
Yes,
contractor's,
yeah.
whatever his value.
So the minimum premium goes, the basis for rating this is the cost of construction within 50 feet of the rail. So as long as that cost of construction is under $143,000, the premium's $500. If it goes over that $143,000, then it starts to increase. But it's still a much better deal than most of them will find on their own. There are contractors that are constantly working in rail corridors, and they carry their own railroad protective liability coverage. They just need to add our name as the insured on the policy, but most of them don't. So this coverage picks that up. And it's a flat renewal for that. So we've had a really good experience working with Zurich on that policy. So finally, we get to our financial coverages. Fiduciary liability is down 3%. We carry $5 million with a $25,000 deductible. Public officials bond, which covers the treasurer, for for $10 million is 27,000, and that was so that renews in January, so it's actually not part of this renewal, but it's been a flat renewal for the last few years, and that's what we're expecting this January. The ERISA bond, I've got on here 350, it's actually $500, but it's still a small expense. And then we have notary bond coverage that we provide notaries at UTA, and right now we've got 12 notaries at UTA. And so when they renew, we get the bond for them.
Tell me what an ERISA bond is. Just
the ERISA bond, that's the Employee Retirement Income Security Act.
Okay.
And so it's required, the ERISA bond is different from the fiduciary liability coverage in that the ERISA bond protects the pension plan.
Okay.
The fiduciary liability coverage is not required by the Act, but we carry it because it protects our fiduciaries. So the ERISA bond protects against theft or fraud. And most fiduciary liability policies will also protect the plan, but the ERISA bond is required, so that's why we carry it. And then in summary, this is kind of where we're at this point. The two big hits are our property and our van pool coverages. And property, we're hoping that will come down quite a bit, but we'll see how that all washes out in the next couple days. So our renewal comes up September 1st is when we have to have all of these coverages bound. Any other questions?
Yeah, other questions? Beth?
I just had a question. Maybe you could just, I know that September is obviously coming up quickly, and I was just thinking, could you maybe update us on as to property and van pool when you get some more information? That'd be great, just so that we would.
So there won't be an opportunity to self-insure van pool this year, and I think Cheryl understands that. This is van pool actually comes out of Cheryl's budget, so it's her group that pays for that.
Right.
And so that's why I work closely with Cheryl on trying to find ways to reduce this premium. So that program's going to take a hit this year. Like I said, with property, we're hoping that Affiliated will come back and reduce their premium substantially. I met with the Utah Local Governments Trust, and they are very anxious to get our business. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them lower that premium as well. So I don't know where it'll wind up. It'll still be a big increase, hopefully nowhere near the 60% that we're looking at, but that's what we can anticipate. If you take out the van pool coverage from that program, my budget increases about 2.5%, and I kind of budgeted for about a 5% increase, so it's actually coming in a little lower than what we budgeted for. So.
If somewhere down the road you decide not to have earthquake insurance,
yeah,
would you get a mid-term adjustment, or you have to wait till next September?
We'd do it on renewal.
On renewal.
Yeah, so it'd be under next year's renewal.
Any other questions? I would just say, as chair, I have the privilege of renewing large claims and the settlements that are associated with it, and certainly commend you, Dave, and your team for your professionalism as I look through those. They're never fun, but there's certainly a lot of work goes into it, and thought and strategy. And
thank you.
Yeah,
we appreciate that. We try to fly under the radar. As long as we're under the radar, things are going good.
Yeah.
But yeah, we appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thanks for that update. We'll hope for some good news here in the next few weeks. So, think that just a reminder that our next board meeting will be on August the 28th at 9 a.m. We do have a closed session for a strategy session to discuss the purchase, exchange, or lease of real property, including any form of water rights or water shares. If the because any public discussion would prevent the public body from completing the transaction on the best possible terms. So I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we go into closed session.
Second?
I have a motion and a second to go into closed session, and we'll go to the engineer cabins conference room just outside of this room. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes. So we'll leave to go into our closed session and then come back at the end for adjournment. We've just returned from our closed session, and that brings us to item number 15, which is adjournment. I'll ask for a motion.
So moved.
Second?
A motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We'll stand adjourned. Thank you.